Investigates uncovers a brand new policing for profit case. This case resulted in a New York man losing a whopping $160,000 on a Tennessee interstate.
Even more startling, critics say it exposes a major loophole around a new law that's supposed to crack down on such abuses.
This reestablishes the trust between us and the people of the state of Tennessee.
Tennessee lawmakers just passed that law as a result of News Channel 5's 2-year policing for profit investigation. Now, it would let any innocent victims take their case to a local judge right away, instead of sometimes having to wait a year or more to get their money back. But News Channel 5 chief investigative reporter Phil Williams discovered that law would have done nothing in this case.
What you are seeing is video that one mid-state police agency kept under wraps for more than a year.
Hey, you don't have any knives on you, do you? No knives? No guns?
Never. It shows how an Indian-American businessman from New York lost $160,000 during a nighttime traffic stop along I-40 in Dixon County.
Holy crap.
Money that authorities would eventually be forced to return more than a year later.
Well, it does show that the government did not have a very strong case.
Penasheth is an attorney with the conservative-leaning Institute for Justice, which has called such practices highway robbery. The cash was seized by an interdiction officer from the 23rd Judicial District Drug Task Force. The agency gets its funding by seizing cash, usually from out-of-state drivers, often minorities, when officers have suspicions that it might be drug money.
That's all hundreds.
But in this case, instead of using state seizure laws, the agent from the 23rd took the cash to the feds, tying up the businessman's money in the federal courts.
Very formal and I think burdensome process.
Peter Stryance is a former federal prosecutor who says he often hears from people who have had $10,000 or more seized through federal forfeiture laws, and he has to tell them to kiss their money goodbye.
You're going to spend 3 times that amount of money to try to get the $10,000 back that was taken from you.
So why bother?
You're right. A lot of people just don't bother.
Are there any large sums of money over $5,000 in cash in the vehicle? Okay, there's not.
In this case, the New York businessman who was in the passenger seat did not want to admit how much cash he was carrying, although his driver did tell the officer that they were headed to Memphis to try to buy a convenience store.
Looking for some work business,
What kind of business do you have?
Grocery.
Do groceries?
Convenience store, yes.
Those statements never showed up in the officer's report. Instead, he noted that a background check revealed that the businessman had previously been, quote, investigated for suspicious currency smuggling. The key word, says Penasheth, is investigated.
They weren't convicted, certainly. They weren't even charged. It was merely an investigation.
Is it okay if I search it, make sure there's no guns or drugs in the vehicle?
After convincing the men to consent to a search, the officer immediately found the cash in a plastic bag in the back seat.
Hey, what's all this? What's all this money? You said you didn't have any large amounts of money in the vehicle. Turn around for me, okay? Hands behind your back, you too.
That's when his tone became much more adversarial.
Now, guys, something's not right. Y'all aren't telling me the truth.
You would have an absolute right not to answer any of the questions put to you by one of these interdiction officers.
It's a good amount of money.
In fact, on this video, the drug interdiction agent seems to admit to another officer that he really doesn't have much of a drug case.
You know, I don't know. Honestly, if we can't link it to drugs, it's still a currency violation.
I'm a prosecutor, not a interdiction officer.
Still, DA Dan Alsobrooks, who oversees the task force, told News Channel 5 that the real responsibility lies with the feds, in this case the DEA, who agreed to file the forfeiture action. He insisted no seizure would have been made at the state level.
I think the process can be very unfair.
And critics say that shows why just reforming state laws may not be enough.
It's a very big loophole.
Wow.
Now, we should point out that part of the delay in this case was to give the businessman extra time to compile financial records so that he could prove to the government that his money was legit. The case was finally closed after the U.S. Attorney's Office asked the man's attorney to propose a settlement to make the case go away. He offered $5,000 and the government took the deal, giving the man $155,000 back. Kristen?
Okay, so Phil, so what happens to that $5,000 that the government kept?
Well, under the federal rules, the local agency that seized the money usually gets to keep 80% while the feds keep 20%. That would mean that the 23rd Task Force still could make $4,000 off of this traffic stop.
Chief Investigative Reporter Phil Williams. Thank you, Phil. By the way, Peter Stryance, the lawyer in this case that you heard from, had one case involving even more money. Agents from the 21st Judicial District, also working I-40, took $275,000 off of an African man who had come to America to buy bulldozers. He eventually got every penny back, but it took 3 years.
And the man ended up getting sued in Africa and almost lost his home.
Most people would think that's pretty unfair.
Yeah, it really was.
Well, you can see everything that Phil has uncovered on our website.